Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The sky's limitless boundaries. The airport buzzed with the rhythmic chaos of an ordinary afternoon. Passengers wheeled their suitcases across glossy tiles, announcements echoed over the PA system, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. Tasha King, a 23-year-old with a love for exploration and a heart full of dreams, stood at gate 14, clutching her boarding pass. She was en route to a leadership conference, a major opportunity that could catapult her nonprofit into the national spotlight. Dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, Tasha exuded quiet confidence. Her dark skin glowed under the terminal lights, and her braided hair was neatly tied back into a bun. She smiled politely at the gate agent as she handed over her pass. "Thank you. Have a good flight," the agent said. "Thank you. I will," Tasha replied warmly as she made her way down the jet bridge. On board, the plane was already half full. Tasha settled into her seat, a window spot in row 12, and pulled out her notebook. She liked to spend her flights journaling, her thoughts a mix of gratitude and ambition. Tasha's nonprofit, Bright Futures, focused on empowering underprivileged youth, and this conference was her chance to pitch her vision to potential sponsors. She had rehearsed her speech countless times, but the nerves still lingered. As the cabin filled with passengers, Tasha noticed a flight attendant, Samantha, walking down the aisle. Samantha had an air of authority about her, sharp, efficient, and perhaps a bit brusque. Her neatly pressed uniform and slicked-back hair underscored her no-nonsense demeanor. She paused near Tasha's row, glancing at her with what Tasha interpreted as casual indifference, then moved on. The pre-flight announcements began, and the plane prepared for departure. Tasha fastened her seatbelt, ready to focus on her goals for the conference. But her moment of peace was short-lived. The trouble started innocuously enough. The passenger seated beside Tasha, a middle-aged man in a rumpled business suit, was struggling to find space in the overhead bin. Tasha noticed his frustration and offered to shift her own bag slightly to create room. "Here, let me help you," she said with a kind smile. The man hesitated, clearly surprised but grateful. "Thanks, I appreciate it." As Tasha adjusted the bags, Samantha appeared. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene, her expression hardening. "Is there a problem here?" Samantha asked, her tone clipped. Tasha turned, puzzled. "No problem. I was just helping him make room." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "Passengers are not permitted to move luggage once seated. That's the crew's responsibility." Tasha blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I didn't mean to." "Please take your seat," Samantha interrupted, her voice firm. Feeling chastened, Tasha complied. She noticed the man she had helped giving Samantha a confused glance, but he said nothing. Tasha shook off the interaction, determined not to let it sour her mood. The plane took off smoothly, climbing into the clear blue sky. Tasha turned her attention to her notebook, jotting down ideas for her presentation. A few rows ahead, a toddler's laughter rang out, lightening the mood of the cabin. A couple of hours into the flight, the snack service began. Tasha opted for a bottle of water and a granola bar. As Samantha handed her the items, Tasha said, "Thank you," with a polite smile. Samantha didn't respond. She simply moved on to the next row, leaving Tasha with an odd feeling in her chest. Maybe she's just having a rough day, Tasha thought, trying to dismiss it. But the tension didn't end there. Later, as Tasha leaned forward to retrieve her sweater from under the seat, Samantha returned, her tone noticeably sharper this time. "Miss, you need to keep your personal items stored properly during the flight," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Tasha frowned. "I was just grabbing my sweater." "Is that not allowed?" Samantha's eyes flashed with irritation. "It's about maintaining order, Mississippi. Please follow the rules." A murmur rippled through the surrounding rows. Tasha felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and confusion. She nodded silently and sat back, clutching her sweater. By the time the plane began its descent, Tasha had retreated into herself, her earlier excitement dampened. She couldn't understand why Samantha seemed to be targeting her. Was it her tone? Her actions? Or something else entirely? As the passengers prepared to deplane, Tasha grabbed her bag and waited patiently in the aisle. Samantha stood by the exit, bidding passengers a curt farewell. When Tasha reached her, she mustered a smile. "Thank you for your service," Tasha said, hoping to smooth things over. Samantha didn't return the smile. Instead, she stepped slightly into Tasha's path. "Hold on a moment," Samantha said. "I need to speak with you." Tasha froze, her heart sinking. Passengers behind her craned their necks, curious. Samantha gestured toward another crew member, who approached with a clipboard. "What's going on?" Tasha asked, her voice steady, despite the unease gripping her. "You've been reported for disruptive behavior," Samantha announced, her tone loud enough for others to hear. "We need to address this before you leave the plane." The murmurs grew louder. Tasha's chest tightened. She looked around, hoping someone might speak up on her behalf, but the other passengers avoided her gaze. "I don't understand," Tasha said, her voice trembling slightly. "What did I do?" Samantha crossed her arms. "You were uncooperative and caused disruptions during the flight. We take these matters seriously." Before Tasha could respond, two security officers appeared at the gate. Samantha handed them the clipboard and pointed to Tasha. "This passenger needs to be escorted out," Samantha said firmly. Tasha's mind raced. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the weight of the situation left her momentarily speechless. The officers motioned for her to follow. As she walked down the jet bridge, flanked by security, Tasha felt the eyes of the passengers on her back. The whispers and stares cut deeper than any words. When she reached the terminal, she finally turned to the officers. "Can someone please explain what's happening? I didn't do anything wrong." One of the officers hesitated. "We're just following protocol, ma'am. You can file a complaint with the airline." Tasha's hands clenched into fists. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I will," she said firmly. "This isn't over." As the officers walked away, Tasha stood alone in the bustling terminal. She felt humiliated, angry, and deeply hurt. But beneath the pain, a fire began to ignite, a determination to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. Little did anyone know, the young woman they had underestimated was far more resilient than she appeared. And she wasn't just any passenger, she was the daughter of someone with the power to shake the very foundations of the airline. The ride back to her hotel was heavy with silence, her suitcase trailing slightly behind as she exited the airport. Tasha had never felt this kind of humiliation before, her mind racing with questions that refused to settle. It wasn't just the injustice of being removed from the flight without cause, it was the suffocating weight of assumptions she couldn't prove but felt in every fiber of her being. She made her way to her room, closing the door behind her as she set her bag down with a thud. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring at the empty space in front of her. The polished surfaces of the hotel room reflected back a version of herself she didn't recognize, unsure, disheartened, and on the verge of tears. But Tasha wasn't one to break so easily. She dropped onto the bed, pulled out her laptop, and began typing furiously. If there was one thing her mother always taught her, it was to stand her ground and demand respect, no matter how powerful the opposition seemed. Tasha composed an email directly to the airline's customer relations department. She detailed every moment of the flight, from Samantha's initial curt interactions to the bewildering accusations at the end. Her tone was firm, professional, and unwavering. She paused before hitting send, rereading the email. Something gnawed at her. This felt bigger than just an apology from the airline. This was about challenging something systemic, something pervasive that others like her had likely experienced, but lacked the platform or confidence to address. With a sharp inhale, she added a line. "This matter is not just about me, it reflects poorly on your company and its culture. I hope you take this as an opportunity to reevaluate your training and policies to ensure no one else has to endure the same treatment. She hit send, watching the screen confirm that her complaint was submitted. But she knew it wouldn't end there. Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that her complaint would be buried in bureaucracy unless she amplified her voice. The next morning, Tasha called her mother, Lydia King. Lydia wasn't just her biggest supporter, she was also one of the most influential businesswomen in the country. Her mother's position as co-owner of King Airways, one of the largest competitors to the airline Tasha had flown on, gave her a unique perspective. Lydia picked up on the first ring. "Tasha, honey, how was your flight?" her mother asked warmly. Tasha hesitated, then let the story pour out. She recounted every detail, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. By the time she finished, there was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry you went through that, Tasha," Lydia said finally, her tone firm but calm. "No one should ever treat you like that, regardless of who you are. But you did the right thing by filing the complaint. Did you include your last name?" Tasha blinked, realizing she hadn't mentioned her connection to her mother. She never liked leveraging her family's influence unless absolutely necessary. "No, I didn't," Tasha replied. "I wanted them to address this based on principle, not out of fear of bad press." Lydia paused before responding. "That's admirable, sweetheart, but sometimes people need a little push to recognize their flaws. Let me make some calls. I'll be discreet, but this can't go unanswered." Tasha wasn't sure how she felt about her mother stepping in, but part of her was relieved. She trusted Lydia's instincts and knew that if anyone could navigate the situation, it was her. Meanwhile, back at the airline's corporate headquarters, the complaint landed on the desk of the customer relations manager, Janet Porter. Janet was seasoned in handling everything from lost luggage to irate passengers, but this complaint caught her attention. The tone was sharp yet professional, and the accusations against Samantha, a senior flight attendant with a spotless record, were concerning. Janet decided to investigate further. She pulled the flight logs and requested the passenger and crew statements from the flight. What she found troubled her. Samantha's report was sparse, describing Tasha as uncooperative and disruptive, but it lacked specifics. The other crew members had noted nothing unusual about the flight, and there were no passenger complaints to corroborate Samantha's claims. Janet picked up the phone and called Samantha. "Samantha, I just read the report about Flight 814 yesterday. Can you give me more context about the passenger you removed?" Janet asked. Samantha's voice was steady, almost defensive. "The passenger was moving luggage without permission and repeatedly ignored instructions. She was disruptive and made my job difficult." Janet frowned. "But why didn't any other crew members mention these disruptions? And why wasn't a formal warning issued before involving security?" There was a long pause. I handled it as I saw fit," Samantha replied. "I've been with this airline for over 15 years, Janet. I know when someone's causing trouble." Janet didn't respond immediately. Something about Samantha's tone unsettled her, but she let it go for the moment. "Understood. I'll follow up if I have more questions." After hanging up, Janet decided to dig deeper. She reviewed surveillance footage from the airport, hoping to find clarity. What she saw confirmed Tasha's account, a young woman who remained calm and composed throughout the entire ordeal. There was no visible sign of disruption or defiance. 2 days later, Tasha received an email from the airline apologizing for the misunderstanding and offering her a voucher for a free flight. She stared at the screen, her frustration bubbling over. A voucher? Was that supposed to erase the humiliation she felt or the assumptions that led to her removal in the first place? She decided to take matters into her own hands. Tasha posted her story on social media, careful to keep her tone respectful, but firm. She didn't name the flight attendant but described the incident in detail, concluding with a call for accountability and systemic change. The post quickly gained traction, with thousands of shares and comments flooding in from people who had experienced similar incidents. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a call from Janet Porter. "Ms. King, this is Janet Porter from the airline. I wanted to personally apologize for your experience and assure you that we're taking your complaint very seriously," Janet said. Tasha's voice was calm but resolute. "I appreciate the call, Ms. Porter, but an apology isn't enough. I want to know what actions you're taking to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Janet hesitated. "We're conducting a thorough review of the incident and the policies involved. I'll keep you updated as we progress." As Tasha hung up, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe her voice was making a difference after all. Behind the scenes, Lydia King had also been busy. Using her connections, she uncovered more about Samantha's history and the airline's culture. She discovered that Samantha had been the subject of previous complaints, mostly from passengers of color, but none had led to significant action. Lydia shared her findings with Tasha, who was appalled but not surprised. "This isn't just about me, Mom," Tasha said. "It's about everyone who's been treated like this and didn't have the platform to fight back." Together, they strategized a plan to push for meaningful change. Lydia reached out to her contacts in the media, while Tasha continued to use her platform to amplify the voices of others who had experienced similar discrimination. Within weeks, the airline was under immense public scrutiny. Facing mounting pressure, the CEO issued a statement promising a comprehensive review of their policies and mandatory bias training for all employees. As for Samantha, she was quietly placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. While the airline didn't disclose the specifics, Tasha felt a sense of closure knowing that her voice had sparked accountability. Months later, Tasha stood on a stage at a leadership summit, her nonprofit now thriving thanks to the attention her story had brought. As she addressed the audience, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in silence," Tasha said, her voice steady and powerful. "When we stand up against injustice, no matter how small or large, we create ripples that can transform systems. I didn't ask for the fight I found myself in, but I'm grateful for the chance to use my voice, not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been silenced." The room erupted into applause, and as Tasha stepped off the stage, she spotted her mother in the front row, beaming with pride. The experience hadn't broken her, it had forged her into an even stronger advocate for change. And somewhere, Samantha and others like her were beginning to understand that the tides were turning, because people like Tasha weren't afraid to demand better. The aftermath of Tasha's experience on that flight continued to ripple far beyond what she had anticipated. Her story had become a focal point for a larger conversation about systemic biases, accountability, and the power of standing up against injustice. What began as an incident of personal humiliation had grown into a movement, a catalyst for change that reached into boardrooms, communities, and even the media. For Tasha, the pace of life accelerated. Her nonprofit, Bright Futures, had seen a surge in interest and support, but the attention came with challenges. Every interview, every article, every panel discussion brought a mix of validation and scrutiny. Tasha was determined to use this platform responsibly, not just for her own benefit but for the countless others who had shared their stories of discrimination and mistreatment after her social media post went viral. One morning, as she sat at her small desk in her apartment, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Janet Porter, the customer relations manager at the airline. The subject line read, "Follow-up and progress update." Tasha hesitated for a moment before opening it. Janet's tone was formal, but carried an undercurrent of sincerity. The airline had completed its internal review and was rolling out a series of reforms, including mandatory bias training for all staff, a new protocol for handling passenger disputes, and the establishment of an independent advisory board to oversee diversity and inclusion efforts. While the steps sounded promising, Tasha couldn't ignore the lingering skepticism in her gut. Words were easy, actions were harder. She quickly composed a reply, thanking Janet for the update and requesting a meeting with the advisory board to ensure that these initiatives were more than just corporate window dressing. Within an hour, Janet responded, agreeing to arrange the meeting. That evening, Tasha met with her mother, Lydia, to discuss the latest developments. Lydia had been an anchor of strength throughout the ordeal, offering both wisdom and resources to help Tasha navigate the public and private challenges that came with her newfound visibility. "You've done an incredible job, Tasha," Lydia said as they sat across from each other in Lydia's sprawling living room. "But remember, change takes time. It's not just about what they implement now, it's about holding them accountable over the long term." Tasha nodded, absorbing her mother's words. "I know, Mom. That's why I want to meet with this advisory board. If they're serious about change, they'll welcome input from people who've been on the receiving end of their policies." Lydia smiled, pride evident in her eyes. "You're not just making waves, you're building bridges. That's what makes this so powerful." A week later, Tasha found herself in a sleek conference room at the airline's headquarters. The advisory board, composed of employees, external consultants, and community representatives, sat around a long table. Janet Porter was there, too, along with a few senior executives. Tasha felt a flicker of nervousness, but quickly steadied herself. She had earned her place at this table, and she wasn't going to squander the opportunity. As the meeting began, the CEO, a middle-aged man with a polished demeanor, welcomed Tasha and thanked her for her courage. "Your experience," he said, "has been a wake-up call for us. We're committed to learning from it and making meaningful changes." Tasha listened intently but remained skeptical. She waited until the floor was open for discussion before speaking. "I appreciate the steps you've outlined, but real change requires more than policies and training sessions. It's about changing the culture, the unspoken norms that allow bias to persist unchecked." She paused, scanning the room. "For example, what measures are you taking to ensure that employees like Samantha are held accountable for their actions? And how are you creating an environment where passengers feel safe to speak up without fear of retaliation?" The room fell silent. Janet shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while the CEO furrowed his brow. Finally, a young man on the advisory board, a diversity consultant, spoke up. "Tasha's absolutely right. Accountability and safety are critical. One idea we've been exploring is a third-party reporting system for passengers and employees, ensuring that complaints are handled impartially." Tasha nodded. "That's a good start. But I'd also suggest involving community leaders and advocacy groups in your ongoing efforts. They can provide perspectives that you might not get from within the company." By the end of the meeting, Tasha felt cautiously optimistic. The advisory board seemed receptive to her ideas, and the airline's leadership appeared genuinely invested in turning this moment into a movement. Still, she knew the real test would be in the months and years to come. Meanwhile, Samantha's fate remained uncertain. She had been placed on administrative leave during the investigation, and while she hadn't spoken publicly, whispers about her conduct were circulating among her colleagues. For years, Samantha had operated with an air of untouchability, her seniority shielding her from significant scrutiny. But now, cracks were beginning to show. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, Samantha scrolled through social media, stumbling upon Tasha's viral post. She read the comments, many of which called for her dismissal and criticized her actions as emblematic of systemic racism. For the first time, Samantha felt the weight of the situation in a way she hadn't before. She had convinced herself that her actions were justified, but now, confronted with the overwhelming backlash, she began to question her own assumptions and biases. The airline had offered Samantha the opportunity to undergo a comprehensive bias training program as part of her reinstatement. Initially, she had resisted, viewing it as a humiliation. But as the days passed and her isolation deepened, she found herself reconsidering. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to confront the beliefs and behaviors that had brought her to this point. As the weeks turned into months, Tasha continued to balance her advocacy work with her role at Bright Futures. The organization had grown significantly, thanks in part to the visibility her story had brought. Corporate sponsors were lining up to support her initiatives, and she had assembled a passionate team to help expand their programs. But the work was never easy. Every success came with new challenges, and Tasha often found herself grappling with the weight of expectations. She turned to her mother and her closest friends for support, reminding herself that she didn't have to carry the burden alone. One evening, as she prepared for yet another speaking engagement, Tasha received a surprising message. It was from Samantha. The email was brief but heartfelt, expressing remorse for her actions and acknowledging the harm she had caused. Samantha wrote about her experience in the bias training program and how it had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and her role in perpetuating systemic inequities. "I can't undo what I did," Samantha wrote, "but I want to do better. Thank you for holding me accountable. You've inspired me to be part of the change." Tasha read the email twice, her emotions a mix of surprise, relief, and cautious hope. She decided to respond, thanking Samantha for her honesty and encouraging her to continue on the path of self-reflection and growth. As the dust began to settle, Tasha reflected on the journey she had been through. What had started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into an opportunity for profound change, not just within the airline but within herself and the people around her. The airline's reforms were still in their early stages, but progress was visible. Passengers reported feeling safer and more respected, and employees spoke of a gradual shift in the company's culture. Tasha knew there was still a long way to go, but she also knew that every step forward mattered. In the end, it wasn't just about one flight, one airline, or even one industry. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel seen, heard, and valued. And as Tasha prepared to take the stage at another conference, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue building the bridges that would lead to a brighter future for all. The months following the viral story were a whirlwind for Tasha. Her advocacy work had brought about significant changes in the airline industry and beyond, but it also came with new challenges. She had become a symbol of resilience and accountability, a role she embraced with pride but also a sense of immense responsibility. Every email, every media inquiry, and every speaking engagement reminded her that the fight for justice and equality was far from over. One day, Tasha received a surprising invitation. The airline that had wronged her was hosting a company-wide summit to unveil their new diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives. The event was designed not only to showcase the changes they had implemented but also to address the broader conversation about bias and systemic injustice in the corporate world. They wanted Tasha to be the keynote speaker. At first, she hesitated. The idea of walking into a room filled with employees from the airline, some of whom might still see her as a troublemaker, felt daunting. But after talking it over with her mother and her team at Bright Futures, Tasha decided to accept. This was an opportunity to ensure her message reached the people who needed to hear it the most. The day of the summit arrived. The venue, a grand conference center in the heart of the city, buzzed with activity as employees, executives, and external partners gathered for the event. Tasha arrived early, dressed in a sleek, understated suit that radiated professionalism and confidence. She was greeted by Janet Porter, who had been instrumental in organizing the summit. "Tasha, thank you so much for coming," Janet said, her tone genuine. "Your presence here means a lot." Tasha offered a polite smile. "Thank you for inviting me. I'm here because I believe in the possibility of real change." Janet nodded, understanding the weight of Tasha's words. "We've made progress, but we know there's still a long way to go. Your perspective will be invaluable." As the summit began, Tasha sat through presentations from various executives who outlined the airline's new initiatives. They highlighted changes in hiring practices, the introduction of an anonymous reporting system, and the establishment of employee resource groups to support underrepresented voices. While the progress was commendable, Tasha couldn't help but notice the nervous energy in the room, an underlying tension that suggested not everyone was fully on board. When it was time for her keynote address, Tasha took the stage with a steady stride. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, some curious, others skeptical, but she had prepared for this moment. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady but warm. I want to start by acknowledging the efforts this company has made to address the issues brought to light after my experience. Change is never easy, and I commend those of you who have worked tirelessly to move things in the right direction. She paused, scanning the room. But I'm not here to simply congratulate you. I'm here to challenge you. Because while policies and training sessions are important, they mean little without a shift in mindset and culture. Bias isn't just about overt acts of discrimination, it's about the small, often unconscious decisions we make every day that contribute to inequity. Tasha shared her story, not just the details of the flight but the emotions she had carried with her, the humiliation, the anger, and eventually, the resolve to turn her pain into progress. She spoke about the messages she had received from others who had faced similar experiences, many of whom lacked the platform to fight back. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice rising with passion. "It's about every person who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued because of who they are. It's about creating a culture where respect and dignity are the standard, not the exception." As she concluded her speech, the room erupted into applause. Tasha felt a wave of relief and pride, but she also knew this was just one moment in a much larger journey. After stepping off the stage, she was approached by several employees, including some flight attendants who thanked her for her courage and candor. One of them, a young woman named Maria, spoke with tears in her eyes. "I've been with this company for 5 years, and I've seen things that made me question if I belonged here. Hearing you speak gave me hope. Thank you for standing up for all of us." Tasha felt a lump in her throat but managed a smile. "You do belong here, Maria. And your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." As the summit wrapped up, Tasha found herself in a small breakout session with several members of the advisory board and a few senior executives. The discussion was candid and, at times, tense. Some participants expressed frustration with the pace of change, while others questioned whether the initiatives were sustainable in the long term. Tasha listened carefully before speaking. Change is uncomfortable. It forces us to confront parts of ourselves and our systems that we'd rather ignore. But that discomfort is necessary. It's what drives growth. She turned to the CEO, who had been mostly quiet during the discussion. "This can't just be a top-down effort. Leadership sets the tone, but real change happens when every employee feels empowered to contribute. That means listening to your people, not just the loudest voices in the room, but those who might be afraid to speak up." The CEO nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right, Tasha. We've made mistakes, and we're committed to learning from them. I hope you'll continue to be a part of this journey." Tasha appreciated the sentiment but remained cautious. Words were one thing, actions were another. Still, she saw potential in the dialogue and resolved to stay engaged, even if it meant holding their feet to the fire. In the weeks that followed, Tasha continued her work with bright futures while keeping tabs on the airline's progress. She maintained a professional but firm relationship with Janet and the advisory board, offering insights and feedback as they navigated the complexities of cultural transformation. Slowly but surely, she began to see signs of genuine progress. Meanwhile, Tasha's personal life had also begun to evolve. The intense focus on her advocacy work had left little time for herself, but she was learning to find balance. She started reconnecting with friends, exploring new hobbies, and even considering the possibility of a relationship, a thought that felt foreign but exciting. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the city lights, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news article about the airline's ongoing reforms, featuring a photo of Tasha speaking at the summit. The headline read, "From Passenger to Advocate, How Tasha King is Transforming the Skies." Tasha read the article with a mixture of pride and humility. She had come so far since that fateful flight, but she knew her work was far from over. As she looked out at the horizon, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been transformative, not just for the airline, but for her own understanding of what it meant to lead, to inspire, and to create lasting change. Months turned into a year since Tasha's removal from the flight had sparked an unintentional yet transformative journey. What began as a single moment of injustice had grown into a powerful movement. Her advocacy had reshaped the airline's policies, amplified voices previously unheard, and ignited a broader conversation about equity and accountability in industries far beyond aviation. Yet, as Tasha reflected on everything that had unfolded, she knew the work was far from complete. The airline had made strides, but culture changes required constant reinforcement. Employees had begun to embrace the reforms, though pockets of resistance lingered. Tasha remained in contact with Janet Porter and the advisory board, providing feedback and occasionally attending meetings. Her insights were valued, but Tasha recognized that her role wasn't just to advise, it was to ensure the momentum they'd built didn't falter. One day, Tasha received an unexpected call from Janet. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Tasha, we've made significant progress in the last year, but we're planning something big, a campaign to showcase how we've changed and why we're committed to continuous improvement. We'd like you to be part of it." Tasha hesitated. The idea of being the face of a corporate campaign made her uneasy. She didn't want her story to be used as a marketing tool, nor did she want to give the impression that everything was resolved when she knew there was still work to be done. "Janet, I'm honored that you think of me in this way, but I need to understand the purpose behind this campaign. What message are you trying to send?" Janet was quiet for a moment before responding. "We want to show the world that we've learned from our mistakes and that we're committed to being better, not just for our passengers but for our employees, too. And we want to do it in a way that's authentic, which is why your voice matters." Tasha considered Janet's words carefully. If handled correctly, this campaign could amplify the issues she cared about and set a precedent for other companies to follow. But she would need to have a say in how her story was presented. "I'll participate," Tasha said finally, "but only if I can review the campaign materials and ensure the focus stays on the broader mission, not just my personal story." Janet agreed without hesitation. "Of course. We wouldn't have it any other way." The campaign planning began immediately. Tasha worked closely with the airline's marketing team, ensuring that the messaging reflected the complexity of the journey. The campaign would feature testimonials from employees, passengers, and community leaders, highlighting the progress made while acknowledging the work still to be done. As part of the campaign, Tasha agreed to sit for an interview that would serve as the centerpiece of the initiative. The filming took place at a sleek studio, where Tasha was met by a small crew and a thoughtful interviewer. The questions were straightforward but meaningful, giving Tasha the opportunity to reflect on her journey. "What's been the most surprising part of this experience for you?" the interviewer asked. Tasha thought for a moment before responding. "The most surprising part has been how many people reached out to share their own stories. It made me realize just how widespread these issues are and how much work is still needed to create truly inclusive spaces. But it's also shown me the power of standing up and speaking out. Change might be slow, but it's possible." The interviewer leaned forward. "Do you think the airline has truly changed?" Tasha's gaze was steady. "They've made progress, and I believe their leadership is committed to doing better. But real change isn't about a single policy or training session, it's about embedding values of equity and respect into every decision, every interaction. That takes time, accountability, and constant effort." So, the short answer is, they're on the right path, but the journey isn't over. As the campaign launched, it quickly gained traction. The airline released a series of videos, articles, and social media posts featuring stories of transformation and resilience. Tasha's interview was widely shared, sparking conversations across industries. Many praised the airline for owning its mistakes and taking meaningful steps to address them, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether the changes were genuine or performative. Tasha welcomed the dialogue. She believed skepticism was healthy, it kept organizations accountable and ensured they didn't become complacent. She continued to engage with critics, responding thoughtfully to their concerns and using her platform to advocate for systemic change beyond the airline industry. One evening, as Tasha scrolled through social media, she stumbled upon a video posted by Maria, the young flight attendant she had met at the summit. In the video, Maria spoke candidly about her experiences at the airline and how the changes had impacted her. "For the first time in years, I feel like my voice matters," Maria said. "I used to stay quiet because I didn't think anyone would listen. But seeing people like Tasha stand up for what's right gave me the courage to do the same. And now, I'm part of the employee resource group, working to make sure everyone feels valued and supported." Tasha smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Moments like these reminded her why she had fought so hard, why she had refused to back down even when the odds felt overwhelming. As the campaign continued to unfold, Tasha found herself busier than ever. Bright Futures had grown exponentially, with new programs launching in cities across the country. The organization's mission to empower underprivileged youth resonated deeply with people, and Tasha's leadership had become a beacon of hope for many. But with growth came new challenges. Managing a larger team, securing funding, and balancing her advocacy work left Tasha stretched thin. She leaned on her mother, Lydia, who had always been her rock. "You can't do everything, Tasha," Lydia said one evening over dinner. "You've built something incredible, but you need to trust your team to help carry the load." Tasha nodded, knowing her mother was right. She began delegating more responsibilities, empowering her staff to take ownership of projects. It wasn't easy, letting go never was, but it allowed Tasha to focus on the bigger picture. A year after the campaign's launch, Tasha received an invitation to speak at a global leadership summit. The event brought together leaders from various industries to discuss strategies for building more inclusive and equitable workplaces. As Tasha prepared her speech, she reflected on how far she had come, not just in her advocacy but in her own growth as a leader. On the day of the summit, Tasha stood backstage, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage, to a standing ovation. She took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in before beginning. "When I boarded that flight over a year ago, I never imagined it would lead me here," she began. "I was just a young woman chasing a dream, trying to make a difference through my nonprofit. What happened to me on that flight was painful and unjust, but it also revealed something powerful: the strength of our collective voices and the possibility of change when we refuse to stay silent." She spoke about the airline's transformation, the challenges of sustaining progress, and the importance of accountability. But she also broadened the conversation, urging leaders to examine their own organizations and take proactive steps to address inequities. "This isn't just about avoiding bad press or checking boxes on a diversity report," she said. "It's about creating environments where everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background, can thrive. It's about recognizing that equity and inclusion aren't just moral imperatives, they're fundamental to our success as businesses, as communities, and as a society." As Tasha concluded her speech, the audience erupted into applause. She felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before, not just because of the recognition but because she knew her message had resonated. After the summit, Tasha stood in the lobby, greeting attendees who wanted to thank her or share their own stories. Among them was a young woman who introduced herself as an aspiring leader in the aviation industry. "You've inspired me so much," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to be the kind of leader who makes a difference, just like you." Tasha smiled, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You already are. Never forget that your voice matters, and don't be afraid to use it." As Tasha left the summit and stepped into the crisp evening air, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been arduous, but it had also been transformative, not just for the airline, not just for the people she had inspired, but for herself. Tasha knew there were still battles to fight and challenges to overcome, but she was ready. Because she had learned that even in the face of adversity, the power to create change was limitless, and it began with one voice refusing to be silenced.